Hey grown-ups, this is a video just for you guys to help you help your kiddo with reading. So what this video is all about is what to do when you're sitting next to your kid and they're reading a book, either just you and your kid reading a book together or something I've assigned to them, and what do I say to them to help them? What shouldn't I say to them? How do I help them grow as a reader? So here are some ideas for what to do about that. One thing to keep in mind is you want your reading time to be fun with your kiddo. It's better for reading to be fun and short than to be long and agonizing. So, it's better to do 10, 15 minutes of reading with your kid a couple of times a day, or than it is to do a half hour of reading with them once and have it be really agonizing and have them be sick of it every time. We want to keep it short and fun. So keep that in mind. One thing to think about is what kind of book is a just right book for your kid. Like when you're trying to pick a book for teaching reading, not a book just to enjoy, right? If you're reading just for fun, it's okay to read a book you've read 1,000 times. If you're reading a book just for fun, it's okay to read a book you can't read any of the words in, you're just looking at the pictures. But if you're wanting a book that's good for teaching, you want what we call a just right book. And a just right book is a book where some of the words are words your kid will struggle with, but most of the words are words that they will know when they see them or can figure out really easy. You don't want every single word to be hard. And you don't want the book to be so easy that they could read it without even looking at the words. You want it to be a book where they look at the words and they can read it pretty easily, but there's, one or two words where they have to really stop and think. And they might need some coaching from you. And that brings us to coaching. What kind of coaching should you do with your kiddo? One great rule of thumb to keep in mind is you don't want to tell your kid something to help them that they couldn't tell themselves if they were alone. Okay, one thing we do as teachers is we hope that the things we coach kids to do will become the things they tell themselves in their mind. So our words will become their thoughts. And so you don't want to coach your child in a way that they couldn't coach themselves. For example, let's say you had a sentence like this: I saw a kitty, and your child was stuck on kitty. What you wouldn't want to say to help them is something like, it's a little fuzzy thing. It's a baby cat. They'll figure it out. They'll feel like, oh, it's kitty. But they could never have told themselves that if they were alone, because they didn't know that the word was kitty, and you did. That's why you could give them that advice. So you don't want to give them any advice they can't give themselves if they were reading alone. So what could you say? Well, there's many things you could say. One thing you could say, and that we say a lot, is sound it out. Sound it out works sometimes. It especially works for a word like cat that just has 3 sounds that all make sense. K, at. So if you see that your child is stuck on a word that is going to be pretty easy to sound out, you can encourage them to sound it out. But it doesn't help very much with a word like through, where there's so many silent letters, or even a simple word like said. Said, that A and the I in the middle it usually makes it like an I sound, side. It's not an easy word to sound out. So it doesn't help much to say sound it out for that. You only want to suggest sounding out when it's something that's going to help. There's some other things you can suggest. Another thing you could suggest is look at the picture. Some people think that's against the rules. You can't look at the picture, that's cheating. It's not cheating. Looking at the picture is just looking at the context of a story. And we do that all the time as grown-ups. When we're reading something, we know why we're reading it. And that's the context that helps us read. And for kids, the same thing is true. It's okay to use the context to help you. This is especially good with content words, like in that sentence, I see a kitty, or if it was, I see a horse, or I see an iguana. Looking at the picture, where there's probably a horse or a kitty or an iguana, will help them figure out the word. And it's okay to say, well, look at the picture, that'll help you. They should be looking at the pictures. Another thing that's helpful is if you think, boy, if there's a word that seems like if they would just start sounding it out, they're totally going to figure it out. You can tell them that. You can say, well, look at the first letter, or look at how the word begins, or what's the first sound in that word. An example, again, would be, let's say that sentence, I see the kitty. Let's say you were reading that in a book where the kitty was already a character in the book, but on that page that you're reading, the kitty's not there. Maybe there's just a picture of a kid pointing because they see the kitty. And and your kid has read, I see the, and they're staring at that word, they're looking at the picture, but they can't see what the kid is looking at, and you know, oh, if they would just go, they'll remember that it's the kitty. It's okay to tell them that, to say, look at the first letter, what sound does that make? And to help them that way. Another thing that helps is telling them to like go back to the beginning of the page or the beginning of the sentence and start over. Sometimes when a kid is working on a word, like let's say it was, I have a horse, they'll be going, or har, horse, horse, and you're like, you're saying it. How come you're not getting it? And the reason they're not getting it is they've forgotten what they're trying to get, right? They've forgotten the story is about being on a farm. They've forgotten the story is about animals. They're so stuck on reading these letters that they're not even thinking. They're saying horse to themselves. They're going, horse. And they're not hearing it because they've forgotten what they're listening for. So it's okay then to say, hey, you're so close. Go back to the beginning of the sentence and read it again. And they'll say, I see the, and it gets them back into the story. They're like, oh yeah, this is about animals I'm seeing. And when they get horse, they'll get it. So it's okay to like get them to start over so they get the meaning of the story back into their head. And again, this is something we as grown-ups do all the time. When we're stuck on a word, we're like, what? We go back and start the sentence over to get the meaning to help us. So it's okay for kids to do that too. This may sound really radical, but another thing that's really helpful is just to tell them to skip it. This is especially useful for a kid reading by themselves on, like a book with a name. Names are really hard to sound out. Sometimes they're from different languages, and they don't matter, right? In a story with a name, it doesn't matter if you get the name right as long as you're understanding the story. You know, if you were reading a novel about Russian princes and you can't pronounce the Russian, you're still going to understand the book. So it's okay sometimes to skip it. There's a story that a kid was reading one time, and they kept getting stuck on the word oxygen. It was a science fiction story, and they just couldn't read the word oxygen. And the teacher kept saying, skip it, just skip it, keep going, keep going. And like 10 pages in, the kid went, it's oxygen, that's what it is. So it's okay to skip it and go back sometimes. And also sometimes, skipping it gives you a clue. Like, again, let's go back to the horse one. If it was, I have a horse, and they're stuck on that, and you say skip it, and the next sentence says, I want to ride it, they're going to read, I want to ride it, and go, oh, it's horse. So skipping it can sometimes help you figure out right away what the word was. So it's okay to tell people to skip it. This might also sound kind of radical, but sometimes you can just tell them the word. You don't want to do that a lot. You want to encourage kids to try to figure it out if they have a just right book. If they have a book that's way too hard for them, you might just have to read it for them, you know, if it's just too high. But if it's a book where sometimes they're stuck, if it's a just right book, every once in a while you have a situation where you might just want to tell them the word. One example is a really common word that's really hard to sound out, like said. Said isn't very easy to sound out. That AI sound is weird. And there's not going to be anything in a picture that's going to help someone figure out said. So sometimes with a word like said, really easy words that I want kids to just recognize by sight, you know, the really common words like TWO, to, or said, I will tell them the word. I'll just tell it to them. Because I'm not trying to get them to sound out their word. I just want them to learn that word. So if you have a pretty common word that you see a lot, but it's not very easy to sound out, it's okay to just tell them the word. The other time I will tell kids a word is if they're doing great on a book, like they're just really rolling through a book and they're having this great success story and you're like, yay, they feel so good. And then you look ahead and you're like, oh no, this word coming up is gonna get them. You know, it's iguana or something. And they've been soaring through the book, they're feeling good about themselves, and you know they're going to get stuck on iguana. If they read up to that and then I see them like react, I'm like, it says iguana. Because I just want them to have a success story on the book. I don't do that often, but every once in a while I do. The other word that it's totally okay to tell is names. Like I said before, names are really hard. There's no clues in pictures that'll help you with a name. The spelling of names is often really unusual. So it's okay when you meet a name just to say that name is this, and then hopefully your kid remembers that for the rest of the story. All right. Well, I hope these are some ideas that help you guys out when you're reading with your kiddos. And, relax and enjoy it. And don't stress a lot about, ooh, am I saying the right thing or the wrong thing? The important thing is reading with your kids. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at supporting them with their reading. And you're welcome to come back and look at this video as many times as you need to.